Oh. Right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Elevenses, another episode thereof. It's Sunday, isn't it? 5th of July. We're rapidly approaching the 50th edition of Elevenses. And in today's webcast, what I've got for you is a host of stories and information. First of all, Motorsports Vision are to reopen circuits in the UK to spectators. Eurosport has signed a deal to cover British Superbikes for the next 7 years. Thousands of German bikers went on the revolt yesterday over proposed a nationwide Sunday biking ban. Bring you that story in a moment. BMW have announced an active cruise control system. I'll show you a jacket that converts into a backpack, which I think is a really clever idea. And we're finishing off the two-parter on simulators I started on last Sunday. So let's carry on with the story about Motorsports Vision to kick off. Motorsports Vision own Donington Park, Cadwell Park, Brands Hatch, Snetterton and Alton Park. So in other words, 5 of the biggest circuits in the country. And up under the coronavirus restrictions, obviously spectating at circuits has been suspended. Track days and things restarted fairly recently, but this is the announcement that spectating at race tracks will restart. And basically what they did was they sent out a press release earlier this week, and they said that day visitors, including season pass holders, will be able to attend race meetings at those circuits from Saturday, 11th of July. So basically that's next weekend. You'll have to purchase tickets in advance. You can't turn up at the door, but you won't have to pre-register if you already have a season pass for those circuits. But what you can't do is turn up and buy a day ticket. All 5 of the venues, that's Brands, Donington, Alton, Cadwell and Snetterton, just to remind you, it says will initially reopen with reduced capacities, and a range of hygiene and social distancing measures will be in place to ensure that visits are safe and enjoyable. To comply with guidance from the relevant motorsports authorities, visitors will not be able to access the paddock and the pit lane for the time being, and no overnight stays will be permitted at least until the end of July, other than for competitors, which is a bit of a shame if it's a 2-day event and you like to take your camper or your tent along. The full list of events that are reopening can be found on the Motorsports Vision website, and it relates specifically to race meetings, and it says until further notice, only participants and their essential helpers may attend a test or a track day. No one else, no family members, no spectating members, no media will be admitted to those events. So that's what's going on the track. We will be able to get out there and watch some motorcycle racing fairly soon. And I have to admit, that's one of the things I like doing, and I have missed. Interesting snippet now from the road casualty stats. Because the first indication of the impact of COVID-19 on accident and crash numbers has actually come out. Grant Shapps, the Transport Minister, was speaking to the Transport Committee earlier in the week, and he revealed that the number of people killed or seriously injured in road collisions fell by 70% during the lockdown. Now, that's interesting because it actually comes against a backdrop of a 60% reduction in motor vehicle traffic. Now, you might expect the numbers to fall in line, and you might say at 70% and 60% isn't that different. But it's worth noting that the casualties fell more than the traffic. And that itself comes against evidence of a rise in speeding because there were fewer vehicles on the road. And what that tends to imply is that many crashes are actually the result of congestion rather than anything else. And that's something that, some people within the road safety industry have been saying for a while. We focus far too much on things like speed and compliance with rules. And in fact, it's congestion that actually causes a lot of these crashes. So it'll be interesting to see if those figures are actually followed up at a later date by anybody who can break them down into more meaningful results. Okay, so that's an interesting piece, I think. Eurosport has announced that they're going to continue with their BSB, British Superbikes coverage. They're going to renew their long-standing partnership with the Bennett's British Superbike Championship, and that'll go on for another 7 years, which is good news if you like your bike racing. Coverage is Europe-wide and basically means millions of fans, it says, across the continent can experience thrilling season-long action. Highlights from every round will also be broadcast on the free-to-air Quest channel, as well as a selection of live races. Eurosport's a much cheaper alternative than Sky Sports, as it happens, although it's paid to view. Sky Sports sets you back quite a lot of money. Eurosport really isn't very expensive, so a bit of a bargain amongst the pay-to-view channels. They'll cover every race, every round, which includes the races like the Super Sport and the GP2 race, the British Talent Cup, Pirelli National Super Stock Championship, the Hell Junior Super Sport, the Ducati Tri-Options Cup, and the Molson Group British Sidecar Championships. And their spokesman, Simon Downing, who's the head of Factual and Sport Discovery UK, says the agreement underlines the long-term commitment to premium content. And they're excited to continue super serving fans, not just serving fans, but super serving them with a high quality viewing experience. And I have to say that I do enjoy the Eurosport coverage. Just a reminder, you are watching Survival Skills here at Kevin Williams and the Elevenses show. You can join me every Wednesday and Sunday at 11 o'clock for this live webcast where I'll cover topical news, controversial views sometimes, and some better biking tips. All right, so on to what is in some ways the main story of the day. And one thing I did forget to mention, of course, is if you have any comments or questions on any of the stories, put them in the comment stream and I will get back to you at the end of the show. This one you might have some comments about, and I'll be interested to see what you think, because this is about what's going on in Germany. There is a hint that biking might be banned on Sundays in Germany. Now, traditionally, Sundays are a day of rest in Germany, where loud noise in residential areas is banned or frowned upon. There are a lot of restrictions on what you can and can't do on Sundays in Germany. Mowing your lawn, for example, is a non-starter. And if I remember correctly, washing cars is also a no-go. And back in May, several of the federal states publicly announced that they were going to propose a noise limit on motorcycles. And in mid-May, the German Bundesrat, which is literally the federal council, they called for stricter regulation of motorcycles, calling for urgent action. And what they actually wanted was a noise ban. And the proposals appear to have been formulated mostly on grounds of speed and noise concern, but most specifically on the noise grounds. And what they're proposing is a blanket reduction on new motorcycles to a noise limit of 80 decibels, which would be lower than the existing figures. And they want these acoustic cameras, which we've talked about on the Facebook page before to be installed to monitor these noise levels. But more dramatically than that, apart from the enforcement of the existing noise regulations and this bringing in of a lower limit, they actually are proposing the banning of petrol engine motorcycle use on Sundays and public holidays. And on those days, the only bikes that would be allowed on the road would be those powered by what they've called alternative drive systems, which basically means electric motorcycles. Only those bikes would be allowed to be used on the road. And what they want to ensure compliance is that the police be given the right to impound vehicles when riders are caught violating these proposed restrictions, even including confiscating them on the spot. And that would all be in addition to hefty fines. Now, I'll just give you a quick overview of how the German government system works. The Bundesrat, which literally translates as the Federal Council, is a legislative body that represents the 16 Länder, which are the federated states that make up Germany. So they're kind of a little bit like the UK's counties, but from a governmental point of view, they're more like the devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, although there's still huge differences between them all. So don't get the impression that I'm giving you a direct comparison, and not. So there's 16 of these Länder making up this federal body. The Bundestag, on the other hand, is the directly elected representative of the people. So that's very equivalent to our House of Commons. So the Bundesrat, which is the federal states, remember, is sometimes described as an upper house along the lines of the House of Lords in the UK, or perhaps the Senate in the US. And both come together to form new legislation. So they've proposed this legislation that is now gone forward to the Bundestag, which is the council, the sort of lower house, if you remember, and it's due to be voted on. So if it was voted on and passed, it would have some fairly sweeping effects on what goes on in Germany. And not just the riding, it would also be this need to provide quieter bikes specifically for the German market. Now, not surprisingly, German bikers have reacted with some outrage. And the result was that yesterday, thousands of riders demonstrated throughout Germany. The group Bikers for Freedom mobilized in cities all over the country. Stuttgart, they calculated between 8,000 and 10,000 protesters attended a rally and a parade there. In Wiesbaden, it was 7,500 motorcyclists out on the roads at a parade in Friedrichshafen, which is down on the Bodensee, Lake Constance, down on the south by the border with Switzerland. They expected 1,000 people to turn out, and 5,000 motorcycles arrived. Hamburg's Reeperbahn district, there was around 750 motorcyclists blocked the road, and 1,000 gathered in the town of Schwerin, which is up on the Baltic coast. In Munich, the protest was technically legal, as bans on large gatherings are still in place, but the police say 6,000 bikes came together to ride along a major road in the late morning. So several hundred cities in Germany and towns saw these protests take place. So it was a huge, huge demonstration by the Germans. Is it likely to pass? Well, motorcycle advocates, including the transport policy spokesman of the pro-business FDP party, said that the ban's not necessary. Their spokesman, Oliver Lukix, said that instead of prosecuting a few black sheep in the motorcycle community, these controls would put us all under suspicion. Federal officials are going to consider the proposals in the coming weeks, but the Federal Transport Minister, Andreas Scheuer, has already voiced opposition to the plan. He says, "We have sufficient existing rules. The bikers show up at the protests, their attitudes towards trying to enforce the bans. This is also my attitude. I'm not going to implement the decision of the Federal Council, the federal states." And he's previously made it clear that he's against further restrictions for motorcycle riders. So here's hoping that this is booted out. It's a fairly draconian measure aimed at one group of road users only, but it does bring home the problem that I have been talking about for many years on my writing, but also a couple of times already on Elevenses, that there is a noise problem for motorcycles. Your fruity exhaust is another person's annoyance. And we should never forget that as motorcyclists, we are in a minority. We live or die really on what other people will decide ultimately. Okay, so don't forget, set a reminder. You can see Elevenses every Wednesday and Sunday at 11. You can catch up here on Facebook after this live broadcast is finished. You can watch it again over on my YouTube channel, and you'll find links at Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and various other places. So, okay, moving on rapidly then. BMW have announced an active cruise control for their motorcycles. Now, let me just set up the screen share again. I forgot to do this a moment ago. Let me just get that's what I want. Flick through the pictures. Oh, come on. I should have done this a moment ago and completely forgot. That's the one I want. Right. So, okay, active cruise control. In principle, it's straightforward. The active cruise control simply monitors the speed of the rider and the distance to the vehicle in front to provide what BMW are calling maximum safety with a completely new, comfortable riding existence. Now, essentially, this is no different from what's been around for years in cars, but it's not been a fitment on motorcycles. And predictably, BMW's development partner is Bosch. There's not a great deal of detail in how this will work, but it seems that the speed and the following distance can be defined by the rider, and it'll be a two-stage system with either a comfort setting or a dynamic setting, and the acceleration and deceleration behavior will be changed accordingly. What happens mid-corner? Because obviously slowing down in a motorcycle mid-corner is dramatically different from braking in a car. And that was one of the things that through the test motorcycle that was being developed with automatic speed regulation, a system that was prototyped best part of 20 years ago, I think. It was the sudden deceleration of the bike when it was automatically decelerated by a speed control that caused problems. Well, BMW say that it will be speed will be adapted whilst leaning, but if the lean angle is large, then the acceleration dynamics are limited. It says to provide a smooth, stable ride. So the hint is there that the more you lean the bike, the less this system can actually kick in. I see two issues. Now, rather bizarrely, BMW say that the distance control measurement has to be deactivated when you set the speed regulation to the dynamic cruise control. Now I'm kind of struggling to see why. Surely the whole point about the speed control is that it works on the vehicle that you're behind. So, however you set the system to work, it has to have something to work with. So how you get a cruise control that changes its speed if it's not responding to a vehicle ahead, I don't actually know. And the other problem is that this automatic cruise control system only responds to moving vehicles. In the case of a stationary traffic jam or traffic lights, then the rider has to do their own braking. Now, again, when does a rapidly decelerating vehicle become a stationary one? You kind of have to think that if it can't detect a stationary cue reliably and put the brakes on for the rider who's napping a bit, there's something a little bit flawed with the implementation. If it brakes firmly because the traffic in front is braking, fine. But if it suddenly just decides it's going to switch itself off because the traffic's actually stopped, then that does sound rather scary. So I think there's some way to go in developing this system as we speak. The button there is on the handlebar lever. You can see how that's set up. Right at the moment, I'd be interested to know how many drivers using cruise control actually hit the backs of stationary queues. I rather suspect it's a significant number. If you've got any data on that, I'd be more than interested to see it. Right, okay, so don't forget, if you want something to read, you can head over to my website at Lulu and find my spotlight page over there, and you can order my books on better riding, or in paperback. A couple of ebooks as well are available, so if you want to read something, that's where to head. Right, okay, back to the screen share option here, and take a look at where have I gone? I've lost it again. There we go. Take a look at that. It looks like a fairly standard jacket, doesn't it? The sort of thing that when you get off the bike on a hot day, you're kind of struggling to know what to do with it. Do you wear it and suffer the heat, or do you take it off and end up trying to carry it over your arm with your helmet and anything else you may be having? Well, here's an innovative way forward. This is actually a bike jacket that converts into a backpack. It rather reminds me of the car driven by Professor what's his name in Dick Dastardly many years ago. The idea is that once you are off the bike, then you simply unzip part of the jacket, and it sort of turns into that backpack. So the jacket's inside the backpack, and you can put other things in with it. The company responsible for it are called Ulka Gear, and they launched it in India. Apparently it's available for international sales too. There are two versions, and they'll come in sizes from extra small to 3XL, so they may not fit the largest of Western riders. Usual sort of details of waterproof, or at least water resistant, which is a more honest statement, water resistant pockets, and a rain cowl, which it says can be worn either over or under the main jacket, which is also apparently water resistant. The founder is one Shahnawaz Karim, and he says, "We have designed a convertible jacket that will stand the test of time. It aims to become one of the most iconic pieces of clothing for motorcyclists. I'm optimistic will emerge as the best rider brand and global brand in India in coming times." Best bit is that it's not too expensive. It's around £100. And if you want to see how it works, I clicked put a video link in for you earlier. Okay, so all right, still to come, I'll be talking about simulators and how they work for training riders, and give you an overview of an inexpensive way of doing this. But DVSA, what are they up to with motorcycle and car training? Well, as you probably know if you watch the show, the dates for the resumption of tests have been given, and a little bit more detail has been filled out by the DVSA. And what they've said is that face coverings will be required for tests, although it's not entirely clear from the statement as to whether this includes motorcycles or not. Rather predictably, the DVSA detail is aimed at car drivers, and they always seem to forget motorcycles. But I would suggest it's wise to assume if you are heading off to your own test, if you've booked your own test on a 125, then I would assume, until told otherwise, that you will need to wear some kind of face covering. Now, as I understand it, this doesn't actually need to be a mask per se, because you'll have a little bit of trouble getting one of those on under a helmet, but it will be the kind of elastic, you could use the kind of elasticated neck cloth that many riders, and myself included, use. But when you are in the presence of the examiner, it must cover your mouth and nose. And your test will be cancelled if you don't come with a face covering and you did not declare that you could not wear one when you arranged the test. You will need to remove it briefly so the driving examiner can check your ID, but there are some valid reasons for not having one. That would include physical, mental illness or impairment, or a disability that means you cannot put on, wear or remove a face covering, severe distress at putting on, wearing or removing a face covering, or whether it would cause harm or injury, or the risk of harm or injury to yourself or others if you needed to remove it during the test, which seems to have covered all the most unlikely bases I can think of. So basically, when booking a test, you need to say up front if you have a good reason not to wear one. Driving examiners themselves will be wearing face coverings, and they might also choose to wear gloves and use disposable seat covers in cars. One restriction on the car test that doesn't apply to the motorcycle world is that your instructor or supervising driver will not be allowed to ride in the back seat whilst you're out on test. Okay, so you're watching Survival Skills. Don't forget, you can support me over on my Ko-fi page. I'll just put the link for that up, ko-fi.com/survival skills, where I've got lots and lots and lots of content on all sorts of topics. There's well over 150 articles and videos and things up there now, and I'm putting more up all the time. Many of these are archived items that I wrote for Facebook. They're still on Facebook, you just can't find them because Facebook makes it very difficult to get to old posts. So if you want to find some of the stuff I wrote on Facebook years ago, that's the place to go. For £3, you can get 30 days access as a supporter to all this content. And if you subscribe for as little as £3 a month, you open up all that access to those back catalogue, as well as additional material, including my survival skills cornering courses. So, all right, on to the last item today. I wanted to talk about simulators. Now, we all know that motorcycle crashes happen. A significant proportion of those crashes is actually avoidable. Rather worryingly, what we find, though, is that it's not just novice riders who have these predictable and avoidable crashes. It's also experienced riders who have them. In the case of a novice, they probably found themselves out of their comfort and knowledge zone. They didn't even know sometimes that the crash could happen. That's certainly a case of a lot of incidents involving cars in central cities. But experienced riders know these crashes can happen, and they know what they should do to get out of trouble, but they don't do it in an emergency. And the answer to that, as to why that happens, is surprise. The minute we are surprised, we fail to react in the way we've been trained. We fail to react even in the way we expect to react. And why does surprise happen? Well, it's something unexpected. Where we didn't predict what was going to happen over the next few seconds, we're caught cold, and that's when we get ourselves into big trouble. And that's why I spent so much time trying to make people aware of the need to predict the future. The problem is, how do we predict the future when it's very rare? Now, you know, the popular view of motorcycling is it's a very risky activity, but the stats show that the vast majority of the time, the vast majority of us get it right. Events that go wrong are actually remarkably rare in real terms. Take the Smithy collision as a good example. Now, in 2018, just under 100 riders were actually killed nationwide by that crash, out of some 350. Around 1,000 were injured in that crash, out of a figure, again, about 10 times bigger, 3,500 serious injuries. How many riders are there? Well, around somewhere between 1 million and 1.2 million riders who are active, and they cover several billion miles every year. And we all pass more junctions than anybody's ever bothered to count. So the implication is that even this most common of collisions between a car and a bike, it counts something like 60% of all crashes in urban areas, is remarkably rare on a one-by-one biker at a time basis. Most riders will never ever have a bad SMIDSI. Most drivers will never ever cause one. So here is an example of a well-known crash, one that we've actually trained to avoid via the emergency stop and the swerve exercises that talk to new riders, yet one that trips up rider after rider. So how can we actually prepare for this? Well, last week I talked about visualization, where we use our mind's eye, the brain's built-in simulation, to run through events in our imagination, and that way we fool the brain into believing that it's experiencing real life learning. And real life learning is what cements a pattern of behavior in our brain. So by imagining something, we improve our ability to slip into the correct response to the emergency without the conscious delay caused by having to think what's happening and now what do I do about it. That is what causes many of these collisions. It's that cognitive delay while we actually work out what's happening and what to do about it by imagining things going on, and then we actually train ourselves to deal with them quicker. Of course, we can do it with a simulator too. And simulator, the great thing is that we can expose riders to situations which are impossible to train for in any other way, such as the driver who pulls out in front of us. And if they don't deal with it adequately, then what we do is we repeat the event on the simulator, coach people through the correct responses until they're able to recognize the developing situation and drop straight into that pattern of response which deals with the emergency. And that training then sticks in real life. And that's exactly what pilot training does. It allows the pilot to deal with an unexpected or very rare event in safety in the simulator. The pilot can learn to detect the early warnings, they can understand what's happening, and it doesn't remove the stress of the incident, which is quite interesting. When they put the psychological response measurements on people in these simulators and see how their heartbeat and their breathing rate goes up, it all goes sky high. But what it removes is the surprise element. The pilot isn't saying, what's it doing now? The pilot says, aha, and that goes straight into the trained response. So if we can defeat surprise in riders as the same way that pilot training seeks to defeat surprise from flying a plane that develops a fault, then we could hopefully push forward rider safety quite dramatically. So the other thing that simulators can do is shock experienced riders out of their complacency. The kind of rider who says, I've never had an accident in this situation, and more or less dismisses the possibility of it happening, right up until, of course, the statistics, the dice roll the wrong way, and then the crash happens, and then the experienced rider crashes, and they're caught by surprise too. So we can shock experienced people out of a standard sort of pattern of behavior and prepare for the unexpected. And again, that's why experienced pilots undergo simulator refresher training. Now, there's a bit of a problem here. The simulators that are used for flight deck training, the things with the big wraparound screens and the hydraulic rams that move the whole gadget on its axis, they're multi-million-pound devices. They're not even close to being affordable for the average training school. Even smaller budget simulators that can give some motion feedback run to several hundred K. So they're probably never ever going to fall into the category of something that could be used by a training school. But there's a surprisingly immersive and surprisingly inexpensive option, and that's 3D goggles. I'm sure that you've seen the sort of thing. You've got a phone that clips in at the front, you pop the goggles on your head, and then you run a 3D video, and as you turn your head around, your vision appears to move around the scene. Now, how do I know that these are actually very immersive? Well, because I've used one. I sat through a 10 or 12 minute 3D presentation some years ago at a road safety conference. I popped the goggles on and they ran the video, and basically it'd been created by one of the fire services. And what they did was they placed you in a car as a passenger, front seat passenger, with three youngsters, the driver, two in the back, and the car's speeding along country lanes while everybody's laughing and joking until it comes around a corner, finds a tractor in the road. They avoided having to simulate the actual accident by just blacking out the screen and then fading the picture back in. So when you come to, you're surrounded by the emergency services who've arrived on the scene to treat the casualties. The fire appliance, the ambulance, the respective crews are all arriving. And as the scene goes on, even the air ambulance arrives, and you can hear and see it circling overhead. Now, at one point, the paramedic comes around to treat me and injected me with a painkiller. And so basically you're sitting there in the seat, still strapped in, being told not to move, and being told this will help. And you look down and you see somebody coming in with a hypodermic needle to stick it in your leg. Apparently, even though the fidelity of the screen is relatively low, when you first look at it, you think, oh, this is a bit crap. When you're in the middle of it, you actually forget that lack of visual fidelity because the overwhelming experience is so real. As I say, you can look around you, you can see inside and outside of the car, you can look over your shoulder, see who's in the back seat, you can look up through the sunroof, and you can see the helicopter. And it's so real that one person apparently had passed out when injected in the leg by the paramedic. So how was it filmed? I'm sure you're thinking this would require quite a lot of expensive equipment. It actually took 2 GoPros. Yep, 2 GoPros, those fairly standard cameras that you can buy quite inexpensively. And all they did was they taped 2 back to back and then mounted it in the car on the passenger seat, and they sent the car off to record the footage. And then it was stitched together. And the software itself is free, and it's available for these cameras, these high-end phones. Total cost, excluding the emergency services turnout, of course, for the hardware was probably around £1,000. Stitching the videos together is a task that anybody who's got any experience at all with a video editor program could cope with. And then you've got an inexpensive 3D video. Now, coincidentally, yesterday, one of my regular correspondents, chap called Robert Weeks, sent me a link to this sort of thing. I've been thinking about it for several years myself now. I'll put the link up at the end of the show. You'll have a chance to watch it and have a think about how technology could be used to prepare riders to deal with these kinds of emergencies. As I said, as long as we pretend that the only way to train people is to do everything right, the so-called perfect performance approach, we'll all continue to be underprepared to deal with real-life emergencies. We make mistakes, other people make mistakes, and pretending that doing it right will prevent these is a foolish conclusion. It doesn't, as we can see. So we've got to basically provide trainees with a way to see these things coming. And this is why I see this role for simulators. And I think these inexpensive 3D videos have a huge role to play in simulating crashes on the road, where we really cannot train riders with conventional training. All right, okay, that is pretty much end of the show. Don't forget, you can come and join me for a training course out on the road. If you're anywhere in the London area, drop me a line. Come and see my website, survivalskills.co.uk. I'm running courses again, socially distanced courses. I'm introducing video elements to replace some of the face-to-face talking to adapt to the coronavirus crisis. And so far, feedback on these courses has been excellent. So do pop over to survivalskills.co.uk, take a look at what I'm doing, come over to coffee, look at the back catalogue of Facebook articles, and head over to Lulu if you want to read a book. All right, I've overrun slightly today. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Any feedback, any comments, any suggestions for future shows, please drop me a line, and I'm more than happy to answer them. Once again, we're back on Wednesday at 11. Thanks very much for watching today, and hopefully see you in a few days' time. This is Kevin Williams. Thanks very much. Bye for now.